Hello, podcast world. It's FNO InsureTech with your hosts, Mr. Lee Boyd, and me, myself, Rob Beller.
Hi, Rob Beller. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you, Lee?
I'm pretty good today. And today is a very nice day.
It is. It's a very nice day here, too, although it's gotten cold again, which is strange.
You live with some weird weather.
Well, I live in California, whereas we like to say in California, anything goes.
Everything's weird.
Now, Lee,
It's like Austin.
Don't be a hater.
Weird.
Don't be a hater.
No, I like California. I went to San Diego over spring break, and it was a beautiful place and very, very nice people. I enjoyed California.
What's not to like about San Diego, right?
Yeah, there was nothing I didn't like.
What a beautiful place. I'm going there on vacation soon, you might like to know, but I'm not telling you where I'm going because I don't want you to show up there.
Well, that makes sense. But no, I did not know that you were going down there.
Yeah. So today we finally, at long last, have a guest on who I actually contacted to be a guest on our podcast before we ever had the first episode. And that is Mr. Adam Kostecki from Amica Insurance.
How exciting.
Very, very exciting. We're both, Lee and I, are enormous Adam Kostecki fans. He's a friend, and I think one of the smartest, most interesting people in P&C.
Yeah, and I would even venture to say in innovation. He can hold a crowd. I've heard him at a couple of different conferences. He leads a great conference session, and I really hope today that we're going to get a little insight into his mind and kind of the way that he thinks and the way that he operates.
Adam is Senior Assistant Vice President of Digital Experience at Amica. He started as a claim adjuster years ago and has worked his way up, and he's very passionate, very creative, very hardworking, and detail-oriented, and just one of the more interesting people that you'll meet. And we're honored to have him on and very grateful to Amica for enabling it. And I think we have a lot to look forward to in this, don't you?
Yeah, I think we have a lot to look forward to. I'm pretty excited about hearing it.
So he understands claims, which is our world, which is a cool thing. But I think he also understands all different aspects of the insurance value chain and organization. And so rather than listening to us jabber on and on, why don't we jump in to
I agree.
You agree with that? You okay
100%,
with that? Okay,
100%.
Here we go. Without further ado, our interview with Adam Kostecki from Amica. Hey, podcast folks. We are here with our very special guest, Mr. Adam Kostecki from Amica. How you doing, Adam?
Very good, Rob. How are you?
I'm good. I've been looking forward to this this episode for a little while. I'm glad you could join us.
Yeah, no problem. As have I. It's something I've been very interested. I've been listening along to some of your other podcasts and very interesting content. So I'm happy to participate.
Yeah, Adam told us before we started today that he thinks that he and one of his coworkers are part of our 3 listeners that we have on our podcast.
That.
Yeah.
I'll appreciate listening to this interview.
Well, good.
Well, it'll give you something to listen to down the road. So
exactly.
We're excited about that. So when we think of Adam Kostecki, of course, we think of your work at Amica. You've been there for a really long time. Why don't you give us a little brief intro to who you work for and what you do there?
Sure. So I work for Amica Mutual Insurance Company out of the home office in Lincoln, Rhode Island. I've been here for 18 years, and I've spent most of that time in the claims department. Most recently, I've moved on to form a new enterprise innovation team where we're looking at some technology initiatives and emerging technologies and understanding how they could apply to our current operations and provide opportunities in the future. And for those of you who don't know about Amica Insurance, we've got 44 branch offices across the country. We're personal lines insurer, auto, home, and life insurance. And we've got about 3,800 employees across the country.
Amica's really interesting. We love working with you guys and just being part of your the juice that you have in the industry, because when we think of Amica, we think of JD Power winner year after year after year. And how do you guys do that?
You know, that's an interesting thing, and I'll say that the JD Power Awards, as we walk by the trophy case every morning, there's 49 of them in the case. It's a source of tremendous inspiration, not only for me, but I think for all the people here on the home office campus, as well as all the folks out in the branch offices. And it's great to be recognized by such a great company as JD Powers. You know, and I think, you know, when it comes to winning the JD Power Awards, what we really look at, or, you know, I think what helps us get there is really the human connection. You know, Amica is very much involved in the direct conversations with customers when they're acquiring policies and explaining and helping them understand the coverages that they need. And then in the unfortunate time that a claim happens, we're very much hands on with the customer, and we provide that level of service with that one-on-one communication with a dedicated claim representative to help that customer through the claims process. You know, I think we're really a people-centered business, and I think that's providing us with significant opportunities in the future to look at, you know, how does the interplay between humans and technology, and how do we maintain our reputation and utilize the new and latest technology that in many cases sometimes eliminates humans from the conversation. You know, it's
Right,
a big thing we think about here in the innovation.
right. I mean, that's kind of one of the aspects of technology, is it replaces the human touch, or it can if you're not careful, right?
Right. And, you know, when it comes to a claim process, empathy is a really big thing. And JD Power, I think, has recognized that over the years. Empathy and explaining the process is something that's really important to do with a person, when, especially when they've had a claim, maybe their first claim or a claim that might be more complicated. It's unlikely that these, you know, self-service online tools are the channel that customers want to communicate with us during those more complicated scenarios. So we've got to figure out how we can provide that same level of empathy in the future through these new digital platforms and tools.
Very interesting. Let's talk for a minute about you and your journey in your career. I think it's really interesting. You basically, I assume you came out of college and you got a job as an adjuster. Is that how it started?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I'm just about to enter my 19th year here at Amica, and I started right out of college. I was a business management major at the time. I was actually working as an auto mechanic, and I had kind of dreams of owning my own mechanic shop. And I also did some home construction in the summertime. So when Amica was interviewing on campus at the time, I really didn't even know who Amica was. And when I learned the role of the adjuster, I thought, wow, this is a really interesting way for me to stay involved with houses and with cars, but not necessarily get my hands dirty every day or break my back every day. So I thought it was an interesting opportunity to pursue. And here I am, you know, 18 years later. You know, I spent, I think, maybe a little bit over 3, almost 4 years as a front lines adjuster. I later specialized in homeowners property, large loss property claims. And then I moved out to our Southern California office. Was out there for about 2 years as a supervisor, and then I've been back here on the home office campus for pretty much the rest of that time. My last role in claims was as a large loss property examiner, where I oversaw large and complicated claims across, I think, 11 states. So, and I think throughout, really, the consistent trend with me has just been I've always been interested in the latest technology and trying to adopt it to my current job. And even as my role as an adjuster at the time, I think it was back in the days of the first generations of the PDAs or the digital assistants. I went out and invested, I think it was like $650 in an HP iPack. And I did this on my own dime just to help myself stay organized as an
Sure.
adjuster, because there's a lot of different things to manage. But I really was able to leverage that technology to make myself a lot more efficient. And the company, I think, recognized that and really provided me with a lot more opportunities to look at and participate in technology projects. As helping at the time, we didn't have web-based estimating systems. So, I was helping to deploy the first generations of the web-based estimating systems back in the days of Marshall Swift Beck,
Right.
before they were, acquired by CoreLogic and Symbility now. But, I was involved in those projects in the early days. And I really, another thing that I really enjoyed doing was working with our adjusting staff and helping out with training and working with our employees and really helping to understand how this new technology, like an estimating platform, for example, could help them make their jobs more efficient. And then I think as a later project that I started working on, really kind of my last project before we formed the claims innovation team, and then which later springboarded off into the enterprise innovation team. But we found a way to take maps and GIS information and third-party data.
Right.
We found a way to combine all that with our policy concentrations and predict out how many claims would happen after a hill. That at the time was pretty revolutionary. I mean,
Cutting edge.
yeah, the provider we were using was still using hand-drawn shape files and maps when we first started down that journey. So it's been really interesting to see how that process has been digitized. And, this GIS platform has become a foundation of how we plan our catastrophe response.
So is that something y'all are still using?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In one form or another. I mean, what was just a dashboard that we created, a web-based dashboard that had some interactive capabilities, has turned into a fully integrated product that we've got as part of our claims management system. So when a new hail claim comes in, you can automatically go into the system and see where that location is in relation to where the hail fell and where other claims and policies might be in that vicinity, and make better, higher level observations and decisions that are consistent with the way the storm happened, rather than just what might be happening at that one property.
So, you gave us a hint there, and that is that you spent 2 years in Southern California. I knew you had a little California in you, don't you?
You know, California was a excellent stop along the way for me. I had a lot of fun out there in Southern California. I couldn't get used to the weather, though. I'll tell you that.
What, it was too nice for you? Wasn't
Yeah,
adverse enough?
I couldn't even tell the difference between the seasons when I was out there,
No,
and it,
that's
it really
true.
threw me for a loop. Seeing people driving around in convertibles with Santa hats on, I couldn't deal with it.
Well, um, so one of the interesting things about you, and you mentioned it, is that you're a very hands-on guy, and you're very interested. I mean, your current work really flows out of your passion of for like gadgets and things and fixing things and making things, right? Isn't that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always enjoyed working with my hands and kind of standing back at the end of the day and really seeing accomplishments. And yeah, that does tie into some of the work that we do. For example, with Connected Home, I get pretty involved. My team will tell you I get pretty involved in taking a look at these new and emerging devices.
Yeah, I was at a presentation at a talk you did, I think at Property Information Report, Brian Sullivan's conference, when you and Gabe Halimi from Flow,
Yep.
and haven't you used your house as kind of a testing ground for different IoT devices?
Yeah, I think very much to my wife and my family's displeasure, I have tortured them on numerous occasions with some of the latest emerging tech devices. I think I'm up to 7 different flow sensing and leak detection systems that I've installed on my water main. I actually installed a bypass loop so that it makes maintaining this system and swapping out devices a lot more efficient, kind of similar to the bypass loop you might have with like a house filtration
Okay.
system.
Uh-huh.
It's allowed me to understand much more about the installation process for some of these new devices, like the ones that get cut in and plumbed into the main line.
Like flow.
Um, exactly, Flow's one example, but last year alone, there's probably half a dozen of these devices that have hit the market, and even this year, I just got my hands on a brand new one from a company called Stream Labs that's looking very promising. I mean, there have been a lot of advancements in the technology with these cut-in devices that's really interesting. And when you think about something like a water claim, that's a significant risk of loss, and these devices that sense flow and pressure and temperature and learn about your normal water usage patterns, the potential that they have to be able to identify when a problem is happening and then not just let you know, but actually cut the water off, I think is just really interesting. And all this has been happening really over the past year. And I think the only way to, at least in my perspective, the only way to get a good grasp on it is to really roll your sleeves up and get involved with it hands on. And I think that I've learned a lot about the industry and the technology by experimenting with it in my own house.
So, what have you learned uh, about water devices?
I think the key parameters, right? And what's going to be able to number one, engage the user in a more engaging experience around the water usage in their home. So things like flow over time. All these devices have different ways of measuring flow. Some will just tell you if the water's on or off, or if it's flowing at a low, medium, or high rate, which really doesn't provide a significant potential to engage the user. Others will tell you right down to the tenth of a gallon how much water has been used through the house. And I think that's an engaging experience for users, especially in areas like Southern California where the water can be really expensive. To engage users around how much water they're consuming and provide them with information around how to mitigate or conserve water to mitigate their water bill, their monthly water bill, so they're not paying as much, I think is really interesting. Let's just say 20% of your water is being used by maybe older toilets that aren't low flow. Like now you have direct information that you can use to plan and identify if you replace those toilets, here's how much water I might be able to save.
Right.
I think I've learned the importance of that pressure parameter and identifying water pressure differences, and whether it simply be just the starting water pressure at the house after you install the device. If you see it's over 50, 60, 70 psi, that's just it's like high blood pressure. It's an early warning sign that you may have an issue. And not only that, if you've got that much water pressure, if you do have an issue, that means more water is going to be coming out. So addressing that with something like a pressure reducing valve can be a great measure to take. And then I think the other thing that some of these devices do, I think Flow is one of these, one example, but there are a few others now coming online that have this capability to monitor pressure changes over time, to identify even the smallest of leaks, I think is really interesting. Because when you think about most of the claims that we see, there's a big population that are slow drips over time that just don't get noticed. And the fact that they occur over time causes things like mold and causes the damage to get much worse.
Right.
And from the customer perspective, many insurance policies have exclusions for leaks that happen over time. So now this becomes a customer problem if the insurance company is going to look at that leak and say, "Hey, this has been going on for, 2 months. Our policy doesn't cover leaks like that." That's a big problem for the customer. And we want to help our customers get ahead of that.
So this actually reminds me of a conversation that we had with another water company, and they were trying to prove to their stakeholders that this device stops damage. But they had a really hard time with it because the device actually stopped the damage. They weren't able to say that we were able to save X amount of dollars because of this device because it stopped. So whenever you're testing these products, what are you actually looking for? Is it the actual customer engagement? How do these products improve our relationships with our customers? Or are you looking to see, are these devices actually preventing claims?
And again, that all gets down to the problem that you're trying to solve with these devices. And if you're just looking at it from a pure loss mitigation perspective, something like a cut-in valve is going to be much more costly to install, but it has a higher potential to mitigate leaks. So I think looking at it as a pure loss mitigation play, you're going to have to answer that question in order to justify that investment. Like, what is the actual lift? If you look at it more as a customer engagement piece or potentially a customer acquisition tool to attract new types of business, those are other metrics that you can demonstrate right away. And I think to look at the value as a whole, including those different parameters, I think really can help to push the project along without necessarily knowing to the T exactly how much you're going to save. I mean, I don't know what the saying is, right? Like even a catfish is right twice a day. Just having some assumption here that and being able to demonstrate, hey, when a leak happens within X number of minutes, the valve recognizes it and stops it. You can kind of extrapolate out how many types of leaks happen like that and what the potential is, whether it's 5 gallon water loss or a 50 gallon or 500 gallon water loss.
How do you, one of the interesting things about devices like this, because they have major implications for insurers as far as mitigation, like you said, is who's going to pay for them? Like some of them can be pricey, hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So do you think the insurer should be paying for those, or should the insurer been trying to convince their policyholders that this is a good device that you should invest in? How do you handle that?
It's a great question. And, some might think about it at this level, right? Why would a customer invest money in their home, especially some of these devices, which might cost 500, maybe even up to $1,000 with the installation? Why would they invest this money just to stop their insurance company from having to pay a claim? And I think that's a fundamental problem that we have to answer as an industry. And rather than talking about who might pay for it, I think you have to look at the business model of deploying IoT and different devices and sensors, including leak detection sensors. And you have to look at the supply chain and all the different points that there are to be able to monetize things through the IoT. And I think when you take a look from that perspective, from the business model perspective, and really analyze the supply chain, there's a lot of opportunity to monetize IoT. And it's not necessarily through the traditional way that insurance companies make
Right.
money. And I think those are the interesting opportunities. And those are the things that might help us launch some of these initiatives in a more expedited way, is by analyzing other ways that we can derive benefit from these devices.
Let's talk about innovation and um, it's a buzzword. It's a big word. We're focused on InsureTech in our podcast and the relationship between the two. But the way that you guys look at innovation, it's much more than just the cool new options that are out there that are being developed in the InsureTech world. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We hear so much about insuretech today. And by the way, I mean, I think that term first hit the dictionary or the lexicon back in 2014, and since
Right.
then, I mean, it's in every other article and every other headline you read. I see insuretech, it's a lot of solutions, right? And some of them are fantastic and truly impressive and utilize the latest capabilities. And I think we as an industry really get hung up on the solutions and what these things can do without necessarily focusing on the problem that we're trying to solve. And I think when it comes to innovation, innovation is really centered around the problem that you're trying to solve and understanding unmet consumer needs, right? Or user needs, whether it be an internal user or an external customer. Innovation is about getting to that problem in a creative way so that you can identify multiple solutions. You can execute tests on those solutions and identify which one is the right one that's going to move the needle, rather than just jumping towards solution A because it's easier to implement. By focusing on the problem, you can really make sure that you're identifying the key metrics you want to move, and then you're using those and developing a process throughout where you can measure innovation and things like return on learnings or return on investment at multiple points throughout the innovation process.
So things have really changed, like you said, that it's only been since the last several years that even the term insuretech is utilized or part of our industry lexicon. And so there's a whole development of a departments of innovation that didn't even exist before, and many insurance companies have had to respond by developing and creating innovation areas and departments and think tanks inside of their organizations that didn't exist before. And you've been, I assume that you've been part of that at Amica, right?
Yeah, structuring around innovation has been a big focus for us over the past couple of years in identifying. I mean, a lot of innovation is happening throughout our individual business units, and they do a great job of identifying the issues and the solutions that are specific to their lines of business, whether it be sales and client services or claims. They do a great job of implementing new and innovative technologies that make them more efficient. I think where the challenge comes up is where some of these new solutions or potentials span across multiple departments and have applications in multiple areas. Trying to spread that innovation across departments becomes a big challenge. Some of these things require large investments, and the only way you can calculate an ROI is to be able to use them as more of an enterprise solution. And I think that requires a different approach. And InsureTech is one aspect of innovation.
Right.
The business model discussion that I mentioned there around IoT, there's a whole set of work that happens around there. There's a whole set of work. We're really spending a lot of time and making investments in our design thinking practice and building out design thinking capabilities, which are really targeting at helping our employees to see things through a different lens and really keeping the customer at the focus. I mean, it's something Amica has been known for. We've really been known for the focus on the customer, but the way we do that is evolving in today's world. Customer interests are changing. We need to keep up with that. And techniques like design thinking really help us center around the user and identify what their specific needs and what the opportunities are around that user. So, our design thinking practice is something that's emerging. We're trying to build on that. And I think just business process, right, and more incremental innovation. There's a lot more that we can be doing from that perspective, more efficient for our customers and for our representatives.
What an exciting time, right? I mean, you're kind of at the front edge of really, I think, a significant and permanent change in our industry. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, it is exciting. And I'll tell you that there is so much happening. And especially for a guy like me who likes to be involved in the details and I see a lot of the different opportunities, I want to, do as much as we can. It's hard to identify, especially when you have limited resources, to pick the bets and to identify where you need to invest your time and efforts. And that's a big thing that I think we're continuing to learn as our enterprise innovation function is growing, is where are the areas that we can help with the organization the most, right? And then getting centered around those versus just launching a number of different activities and pilots and tests that may or may not have results when they're completed.
So let's talk for 1 second about design thinking. Can you just give us a definition of what that means?
Oh, great question. So, design thinking again is really keeping a user-centered focus. There's a multiple step process that involves centering around the user and identifying unmet needs, identifying multiple solutions. You use tools like empathy maps to really identify what the customer is all about, and through things like business model canvas, you can get your ideas all onto one page where they can be refined. That becomes kind of the document that, with these new larger opportunities, that it's an always living document that's constantly evolving as you learn more. Design thinking is just a multi-step process that keeps the user at the center and is really centered around iteration, testing, and learning. And design thinking is a great process to have at the front end of an agile software development process, because when you pair up agile and design thinking, you do a lot more on the front end with prototypes, and it's a lot easier to tear up a wireframe or a piece of paper that you've shown to someone and they say they don't like it, rather than having it developed and go out to the users and have them,
Sure.
this doesn't do what I thought it would do.
By agile, what do you mean by agile? What is an agile development?
Our IT department has done a great job at transforming and beginning the transformation to a more agile approach to software development. It's really involving cross-divisional groups and small teams that are empowered, um, that can take these projects. It's a different approach to like just traditional project management, which is more waterfall. You get the list of requirements, people go off on their own and develop. Agile is really a smaller group with highly skilled individuals that have capabilities across the spectrum that can take a project from start to finish and continue to iterate on it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It seems like that way you can get the most out of those meetings and those developments without going off of course.
Yeah, agile is actually, I guess it parallels with innovation. A lot of times people think innovation is just this ad hoc process that, you get a bunch of creative people in a room and they just start iterating. The reality is, to be successful at innovation, you have to have a consistent process and well-defined checkpoints throughout in order to maximize your effectiveness. And agile is very similar to that. There are a number of ceremonies, agile ceremonies that happen, sprint planning, daily stand-ups or scrum meetings. These things help keep everyone aligned on the same page and keep everyone accountable for different deliverables throughout the process. So, very much innovation, design thinking, and agile development go hand in hand.
So that seems like it would take up a lot of time uh, to do. Is it worth it, or do you find that the teams are spending too much time in these meetings, these scrums, these sprints, these stand-ups?
It does take a large commitment of time, and I think it's a new way of doing work. And I think the inverse is very dangerous in today's world, right? When you sit around a conference room table with a bunch of business people and you develop a concept and you develop requirements and you pass it off to a team that might take 6 months, a year, maybe 2 years to develop and deploy it. By the time that product hits the market, you've made such a large investment that if you haven't hit the mark, it can be very costly. So, through these iterative processes like design thinking and agile development, you can test and learn along the way. So that de-risks the whole development process and ensures that what you're actually going to launch is going to have value and is going to meet the needs of the customer. Whereas traditional waterfall, things change so quickly today that that approach has a lot of risk to it.
Yeah, with all of that, I completely agree with you that things go so fast. In the world of innovation, change is an everyday occurrence. So I appreciate you giving us a look into that and kind of the way that y'all operate. I started thinking, what you said that you were out there trying to find you know the answer to the problem. You're identifying the problem. What are what is one of the big problems that you're trying to find a solution for today?
Well, there are a lot of them. And I think central to one of the big problems and future opportunities is really the changing consumer and the evolution of how people consume things. It's changing, from an asset driven people owning assets, houses and cars, to where people are now wanting the experience from them. They just want the ride, or they just want the vacation, or whatever. The culture and the economy is really shifting towards this experience driven world, as opposed to owning assets, and because you own them you need to insure them. Like, that's a big problem slash opportunity for us in the insurance industry, is how we're going to adapt to this changing consumer demographic. Things like efficiency and pricing are always important, and you can get really wrapped up on becoming highly efficient and really trying to drive costs out of the process, which is always important, and it needs to be there. But it's an internal focused thing that if the market changes too quickly, all of a sudden that work doesn't
Good point.
necessarily matter, right? If you create the most efficient auto policy and then people stop buying cars, you've got a problem.
Right. You
Right.
have a great policy with no place to put it.
Right. So, it's that's one of the big challenges, is like, trying to figure out, the trends that are happening, and through the scanning and monitoring for these weak signals, and developing the trends and the patterns that are going to change consumer behavior, and trying to figure out when
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
going to happen.
I think that's a great point, and something that is so relevant, like you're saying, to our industry, to the insurance industry. Um, I mean, I had personal experience where my family was talking about buying a second home, and we went down the road, and I just kept thinking to myself, this is going to cost so much money. We can rent different homes in different places when we want to, so we can move our vacation home around. Why would we commit to one in one place? And that was something that
Yeah.
wasn't available 15, 20 years ago, whenever it was.
Right.
But so the implications for our industry within that are significant. And who knows what it's going to be 3 years from now. So how do you plan
Right.
your company and your revenue when there's such a big question mark about how things are changing? Very interesting.
Yeah, and I think like your example is spot on, but think of it this way, right? Like think about how many people are telecommuting nowadays, right? And people you can work from anywhere. Imagine what that looks like to a millennial. If they can go from house to house a week at a time rather than owning a property or renting a house, they could spend a week at the beach
Mhm.
working remotely,
Hmm.
and they can just kind of go from area to area. They become like it's much less owning stuff may not be important in the future as it is today.
Right.
So like that changes the whole pattern of how people live. And who knows whether that's going to be 5, 10, 20, 30 years in the future. No one can really answer that question now, but we all have to be thinking about if that does happen, if there's a likelihood of that happening, what are we going to be doing to address that new pattern of consumerism?
One of my favorite things about innovation is you're trying to solve the problem, but you're trying to solve the problem that might not even exist yet. And so it sounds like you spend a lot of time thinking, where are we going to be in a month or 5 years, and what will the problems be then? Because the actions that you take today will be in effect when those problems arise. So it seems like it's a very fun job, but it's a very stressful job because you're a little bit of a fortune teller. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. And I think, to try and look from today into the future will give you one perspective, but to try and put yourself in the future and look back to see how that might apply to today, I think gives you an entirely different perspective. And think about autonomous vehicles. Everyone in the industry talks about
Yep.
autonomous vehicles and how self-driving cars are going to eliminate accidents. Take a step back from that and just look at the cars that are hitting the road today with collision avoidance technology. you know, collision avoidance technology and making my vehicle stop instead of rear end the vehicle in front of me, right? So many accidents happen because I'm not paying attention and I rear end the vehicle in front of me. If I can just eliminate that one scenario, there's going to be a notable change in accident frequency. And this technology is here today. And it's just in the new car fleet, right? And you think about like back in the days when airbags came out, it took 30 years or so for airbags to go across the whole fleet and really make a difference on injury claims, right? What happens when somebody comes up with a device that's low cost that can be retrofitted into existing cars and give them this autonomous vehicle or collision avoidance feature of stopping from rear-ending the car in front of me, right? And right now we're doing things like, hey, let's monitor for distractedness in driving, right? That's a symptom. The problem is my car rear ends the vehicle in front of it because it doesn't recognize, right? And distraction, it may not be as important if my car could just do that. So maybe that's the problem I want to solve rather than
Mhm.
people texting while they're driving.
Mhm. I love that. I love that. The what Lee said about being a fortune teller, and we're just on our podcast and in our work at 470. We're popping around to all kinds of different things, and sometimes, like with carriers, we have to follow what you're doing. Um, but there's it's a vast, big world. Are you involved in um, looking at and shopping through insuretech companies? Are you uh, involved in your work in staying abreast of what's new and what's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. And on the innovation team, We've got a great individual that helps us to scan the environment and really helps us with the innovation partnerships. Um, I'm sure she's listening, Elizabeth Vincent. She's a great asset to our team, and she does a great job kind of keeping an eye on that external marketplace and helping us to coordinate these relationships and partnerships. I mean, I think that's been a big trend with InsureTechs. Where they initially came out on the market, the talk was all about how they're going to disrupt us and put us all out of business.
Correct.
And here, after years, the conversation is shifting to this partnership model. And I think we could all stand to learn a lot from these partnerships. And the more that we can be external facing and not just internal facing, trying to solve all these problems on our own, the partnerships make sense. But I think you also have to be cognizant that while some of these things might be easy and quick if you partner, you got to be cognizant of the business model and how much of the value you really want to capture, right? You know, like think about Apple when they launched the iPod. It was all about the problem they were trying to solve, right? There were other companies that launched MP3 players. The problem they were trying to solve was CDs skipped in a Walkman. So they just wanted to create a digital media player that wouldn't skip. Whereas Apple looked at it and said, hey, I want to make the music listening experience much better. And by doing that, they created an ecosystem in iTunes that allowed them to monetize much more than just the cost of this device. And that's really what
Right.
made their money is off that ecosystem. So as an organization, when we examine these business models, we have to be cognizant of that. And in some cases, we want to be intentional and protect different areas of the supply chain or the value chain that makes sense to us rather than just partnering because it's easy.
So it sounds like whenever you're partnering with these companies, you're looking to make sure that they're actually solving a problem, that they're really out there, doing something good. What are some other attributes you look for when partnering with some of these insuretech companies?
You know, that's a great question. I think the founders and the leadership team is always an important thing to look at, and some of their past success. I think, do they have a novel concept or a novel approach to solving this problem? Certainly, is there any IP or patents involved that protect their solution so that if it becomes well known, they can protect it? There's a lot of factors. How large the team is, how early on they are. We've got to make sure that they make a fit with our organization. Um, and how risky the solution might be. Does it provide reputational risk? There's a lot of different factors that we have to look at before we can really embark on these partnerships. And again, it really depends the severity. If it's a simple solution with low risk, the level of scrutiny is a lot different than if it's something like a core system or a platform.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. And we get to interview a lot of different companies, and we get to interview a lot of generators and venture capitalists, and that's really what it's about. It's about building the partnerships and then putting yourself with those like-minded people who are going to be able to work with you, not against you, right? So it's really about seeing and making sure that everybody's on the same road, on the same path, that can really build a partnership, not just a connection, but a true partnership. So I think that's a great way to go about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And things like the AM Best just recently announced new scoring criteria for innovation at insurance companies. So they're looking at a set of, I think, 6 different factors. And one of the things they're very open about is that the innovation that you develop doesn't have to be done all internally. It can be through partnerships, or it can be
You can
adopted from an
you
external.
can buy it, basically.
Yeah, yeah. That decision, build, buy, or partner, is something that's so important to get right throughout these different platforms or whatever it is you're looking to do. You always have to think, do we want to build this on our own, do we want to buy it from someone else, or do we want to partner to create it? Really important decision to make.
Let's talk about the AM Best criteria. What can you share with us about what you know about that?
It's a brand new criteria. I think actually the commenting for it may have just closed, the public commenting, but it's a criteria. I think there are 6 different factors that look at things like leadership and culture, and whatnot on the input side, and then they also focus on the output side, which is by looking at results and the level of transformation. And I think the interesting thing when you look at the equation, and anyone I believe can go and download this report from the AM Best site, and I'd encourage any other innovators out there to definitely look at this set of criteria. What's interesting is when you look at the equation, they've taken all 6 of these factors and plugged them in. You score each one individually, but what they've done is they've taken the output side. There's only 2 factors there, but they've doubled it. So the message they're sending here is that innovation isn't just about all the activity and all the cool stuff that you can do. Innovation is about the results that you get through successful
Interesting.
deployment and operationalizing it.
So it's not just can you do it? It's can you do it well?
Right. And things like launching pilots and conducting experiments and doing design
Mm-hmm.
thinking trainings. Those are all like activities, and they're important activities to monitor at the beginning of the innovation process. But really, you need to make a shift to start looking at what are the metrics we
Mm-hmm.
need to monitor that measure results in the output. What are we getting from all this activity, and where is the value across the organization? Whether it be a quicker claims process, whether it be better pricing to target better customers, much higher growth levels. Is it higher customer engagement scores? Like, what are those key metrics that we're looking to move through these different initiatives?
Yeah, we've been involved in many pilots at our company because one of the kind of our strategic initiatives is to be innovative, to be considered innovative, to be willing partner in trying stuff, and the 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 pilots that we've been involved with, and we've been involved with many that have failed, uh, are kind of like what you're saying, and that is that we've been overwhelmed, right? Not focused, not clear enough. The scope crept out. We weren't measuring the right things. And so instead of maybe getting a lot out of it, even if it wasn't successful, it 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 becomes an uncomfortable kind of failure. And yeah, that's been a problem for us.
Yeah, and I think the key to remember when you're talking about pilots, it's so tempting to look at some of these solutions, especially the really comprehensive ones, and say, "Oh, look,
Right.
we'll be able to test A, B, C, D, and F." We want to get an idea on what all these different things mean. But one of the concepts that I've become aware of that's been really helpful is the concept of a rat, right? We've all heard of MVP, right? The minimum viable product. Well, the rat is the riskiest assumption test. And when you're going to launch these pilots, you want to identify the one, maybe two most important things that you need to demonstrate through the pilot. And then you want to structure the test as lean and mean as possible as you can to answer those one or two main things. Because you know what? If the success of the pilot is contingent on factor A, all you need to do is disprove that factor, and then you move on to the next one, right? And then it's a matter of identifying these assumptions and lining up experiments aimed at the assumptions to either validate or invalidate them, and continuing to learn along the way. And it's something that I think we can all learn from. We're certainly uh, among our team. We do a lot of this pilot activity. We're definitely looking at the way that we do that so we can be more efficient in the future.
You used a term innovators, we innovators. Is there a network of innovators out there that you're a part of?
That's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of groups and whatnot on LinkedIn that I follow when it comes to innovation. There are a lot of great organizations. I'll give a shout out. Innovation Leader out of Boston is an amazing organization that puts together corporate innovators across multiple different groups in different industries, and they do events a number of times throughout the year. They have great publications, a lot of great information. Um, that bring these innovators together. And what you find at these groups is it's the same problems that everybody's struggling with. whether it be resource constraints, whether it be not fully understanding the problem,
Sure.
pilot hell, what they call sometimes, just continuously going through pilots. Everyone struggles with the same problem. So this cross industry approach is really helpful. And when there isn't this competitive angle, it makes it easier to learn from some of these other organizations outside of the insurance industry.
I'm very interested. What would your advice be to someone who is interested or wants to become a innovator? Somebody who wants to change their career and move into innovation. What advice would you have for them?
Oh, that's a great question. I would recommend um, finding something you're passionate about and getting out there and testing and learning. Right? There's so much to be learned through experience and getting rolling up your sleeves and getting involved. Find something you're passionate about, becoming an expert in it through this experimentation, and become the resource that people want to come to and ask questions and learn more. And just pick something that everybody cares about, or pick an issue that people care about, and then go as deep as you can on it.
Interesting. So it's about passion. I would agree with that. I think that's well said.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Passion is important, and people on my team will tell you I'm a passionate guy, but sometimes it can become an overused skill, right? And you can't be too passionate, right? Especially on innovation, sometimes passion turns into, hey, solution A is the way to go. We got to move this forward. And you
Absolutely.
need to be ready at any point to say, you know what, solution A isn't the right thing. Let's move on to the next thing. So sometimes being too passionate can be a negative.
Hmm.
When we're done, you brought something up about empathy maps. I gotta I gotta hear about empathy maps at some point in time. I think my wife wants me to put together an empathy map.
I want you to put together an empathy map.
No, that ain't happening. You get none of my empathy. Sympathy, yes, for having to work with me. But we want to ask one more question, and that is about conferences. You're a frequent speaker at conferences, but that means you're also a frequent attender of conferences. Can you share with us some of the conferences you like, or that you think are important, or maybe that you don't like to miss?
Sure. I think I'll give a shout out to the folks at PLRB, their conference series, especially the claims conference every year. One of the most well attended events, great for networking and bumping into folks like you guys over at 470. From an innovation perspective, again, I'll mention Innovation Leader. They're a great organization. They run a number of great innovation focused events. There's a series, typically it's in Boston every year, FEI, Front End of Innovation, that again is really focused across industries on innovation. That's a great series of events. InsureTech Connect is a great way to kind of keep up, although even myself, I go to those events. It's overwhelming, the amount of people and the amount of solutions there. It's that's a really big event. On ramp insurance is another one that we try to get to every year. Great format of that with a combination of the panel
Hmm.
discussions as well as the one-on-one meetings with startups. That's another thing. Like just attending conferences, there's so many great ones out there. It could be a full-time job.
Yeah,
Um,
it's funny what's happened in the conference landscape in our industry in the last few years. I mean, 3, 4 years ago there were a few, and now there are so many, and I think that that's reflective of what's going on with innovation and insurtech in particular. Is that there's so much new information. There's a lot of opportunity for different conferences to emerge and be important, and we see that. I mean, on ramp, ITC. These were conferences that weren't around 5 years ago, and there's more. And um, you know, I usually see you at Property Information Report, which I also have
yep.
enjoyed through the years.
Yeah, that's certainly one of my most Yeah, one of the events I'm most interested in attending, the auto insurance report. I haven't made my way to the auto insurance report event, but I definitely am going to have that on my list. Brian Sullivan does a great job with those different events.
And it doesn't hurt that it's, on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean either. So,
Yeah, it's nice to get back to Southern California, maybe once or twice
uh-huh.
a year.
Uh-huh. I want you to start letting me know when you're in California so that I can um, uh, make sure that you get the proper approvals and visa, because we like to be careful about who we let out here in our little crazy world. But well, listen, we are thrilled and honored to have had you today, and we thank both you for your time and your effort, and Amica for making you available to us. And I'm going to ask you the most important question, and that is, would you come back again as the world continues to evolve and change, and be willing to talk with us?
Rob, I always appreciate catching up with you at the different events we bump into each other, and happy to potentially come back as another guest for sure.
We would appreciate that, and we'll see you at the next one.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you. Lee, I really enjoyed talking to Adam. That's a interview that we've waited a little while to get in, and Adam's a friend, and most especially a really interesting man.
Oh, I had a great time talking to Adam. I first met Adam at a conference at a InsureTech conference a couple of years ago, and ever since then, he's a very engaging person. He's a great guy
Very.
to talk to, and he really gets my mind going. He gets me thinking outside of the box.
Yeah, when I think about the unusual and unique people in the business, he's one of them. And I'll never forget one time I was having lunch with him at a conference, and he was showing me picture. We were talking about what his hobbies and whatnot. And the man is an accomplished uh, home improvement guy, and he takes that passion that he has and lives it in all the aspects of his life, and his work is no exception. I mean, the man has gone from being just an insurance adjuster all the way to a key person in the innovation area at Amica, and that's based on this this intense passion that he has.
Yeah, I really find that a lot of the people who um, are great at what they do, it's their job is not just an 8 to 5 job. They take their passion, they take their in this case, he'll take his innovative skills
Right,
and his love of technology and his love of IoT
right.
into his personal life, and that's really
Mhm.
what makes a person so good at what they do. I would say Amica is lucky to have him, and
Lucky to have him.
and then Amica is a great place for him to be at.
And I was very struck by the term innovator, um, as almost a new age job title um, in our industry. Uh, with the development and the coming on of a whole new discipline and department in carriers, and that is the innovation department. And if you are a leader in that, your title's an innovator, and that's, I think. I mean, I know he has other titles. He's a assistant vice president, whatnot. But the man, he's a professional innovator.
I liked how he was telling us about AM Best developing a criteria to look at innovation departments, kind of being able to rate and decide who's doing a good job at innovating, which is interesting because being innovative is a lot of time outside the box. So how do you actually capture that and grade it? But it's such a big market and such a big group within companies that AM Best decided we need to look at this
But
and
not
actually
just but not just do they pour can they pour a lot of money in it and have a lot of people working there.
right.
Like Adam said, is it a well-defined process
That's right.
so that it accomplishes more than just being able to use a new technology, but all the strategic implications that surround it.
Right. Right. A department can say, a company can say we have a innovation department, but one that actually does what Adam's group does with their agile development, with their design thinking, with their testing of products, with their moving forward with ideas. I mean, it's really, that is what an innovation department should be doing. And
Mhm.
so, I'm excited to see kind of that AM Best where that comes out at.
Well, we are super grateful to him for being with us today, and and I really hope we have him again. And frankly, I hope we can hear from some other innovators at some other carriers. And if you're one of those people out there, please contact us. We'd love to have a conversation with you on our podcast to continue to build on the information and the ideas that are going on inside of carriers in the world of innovation. And so we thank you for being with us today and remind you that the best way that you can support us is by subscribing to our podcast and just listening. Give us your feedback if you'd like. You can reach us at fno@470claims.com. And that's it for today. And what do we always say at the end, Lee?
Bye, everybody.